Theron Keel hadn't planned on winning a person at the Celestial Stardust Casino. He hadn't planned on winning anything at all, really. But here he was, bare-chested beneath a loose-fitting flight jacket, wearing only light synthweave trousers and grav boots. His well-muscled physique drew curious stares and subtle sensipings from the diverse alien species thronging the bustling spaceport's most popular gambling den. The night had begun simply enough, a few low-stakes wagers at the Kronos roulette wheels, nothing significant, just enough to get a feel for the atmosphere of the orbital station and perhaps win enough credits for a decent meal at the Spacer's Rest. Fate, however, had other arrangements. Another winning hand, human, growled Zorgan, the scorn trader across the table. His violet-hued skin flushed a deeper, almost bruised shade as he watched Theron rake in yet another pile of cred chips. The scorn's multiple, manipulator tendrils twitched with barely suppressed frustration. Theron flashed his trademark, slightly cocky grin, running a hand through his tousled sandy-brown hair. "What can I say, Zorgan? Lady Fortuna seems to favor me tonight." The growing crowd of spectators murmured, clicked, and hissed in a multitude of xeno-languages. It wasn't every cycle they witnessed a human, especially one who looked like he'd just finished a zero-G workout regimen, clean out one of the station's most notoriously shrewd merchants. Zorgan's four ocular organs narrowed, all focusing intently on Theron. "One more hand," he rasped, his translator barely keeping pace with his guttural native tongue. "Double or nothing." Theron leaned back, studying the merchant. He'd already won enough to live comfortably for several standard months. The smart move would be to cash out and walk away. But something in Zorgan's tone, a desperate edge, piqued his interest. "Double or nothing, huh?" Theron raised an eyebrow. "You don't appear to have anything left to wager, friend." A cruel, almost predatory smile spread across Zorgan's face. "Oh, but I do." He snapped his fingers, and a figure emerged from the shadows behind him. Theron's breath caught in his throat. She was humanoid, but undeniably not human. Her skin possessed a soft, almost luminescent jade hue, like newly sprouted flora under a filtered sun. Long, platinum-blonde hair was elegantly coiled into a complex knot, a few stray strands framing a delicately featured face. She wore a form-fitting metallic weave corset of a similar platinum shade that accentuated her slender, yet undeniably graceful figure. The plunging neckline drew more than a few appreciative stares, and sensoprobes, from the assembled crowd. "My companion," Zorgan announced, pride evident in his tone. "Worth more than all the credits you've accumulated this evening." The woman's expression remained impassive, a mask of serene indifference. But Theron caught a flicker of something in her large emerald-green eyes. Resignation? Or perhaps, a glimmer of hope. "You can't be serious," Theron stated, his playful demeanor vanishing instantly. "She's a sentient being, not property." Zorgan waved a dismissive tendril. "On this station, everything has a price. Do you accept the wager, or are you admitting your luck has run dry?" Theron looked at the woman again. This time, their eyes met directly. In that brief, charged moment, he saw it clearly, a silent, unspoken plea. "Deal the cards," Theron said, his voice firm and resolute. The crowd pressed closer, a palpable wave of anticipation rippling through them, as the dealer, a six-limbed Xyler, shuffled the deck with practiced dexterity. The tension in the air was thick enough to slice with a plasma blade. Theron glanced at his cards, 3 kings and 2 aces. A full house. Strong, but not unbeatable. Zorgan revealed his hand with a theatrical flourish, 2 pairs, queens and tens. The crowd erupted in a cacophony of alien exclamations. Zorgan's face contorted in disbelief, his tendrils writhing in unrestrained fury. "Impossible," he roared. "Nothing's impossible," Theron said, standing up. "Just improbable." The jade-skinned woman stepped forward, her movements fluid and graceful despite the palpable tension. But instead of moving toward Theron, she whirled on Zorgan. "You worthless piece of void scum," she spat, her melodic voice filled with venom. "You wagered me like some common cargo?" Zorgan recoiled, stammering excuses. "Lysira, my dear, I was certain." "Save it," she cut him off, turning to face Theron, her emerald eyes blazing. "And you? Did you think you could simply win me, like some trinket?" Theron held up his hands, palms open in a gesture of peace. "Actually, I never intended to own you. You're free to do whatever you wish." Her anger faltered, replaced by a flicker of surprise. What? You heard me. Go wherever you want. You're your own person. The crowd watched in stunned silence as Lysira processed his words. Finally, she straightened her shoulders, a newfound determination in her stance. Then I choose to stay. For now. Zorgan's face darkened. You can't. I can and I will, she snapped. You forfeited any claim to my choices when you placed me in the pot. The casino security chief, a towering KRYLL named Gorath, materialized beside their table with an unsettling grace that belied his massive chitinous frame. His crystalline exoskeleton refracted the ambient light, creating a kaleidoscope of threatening shadows across his face. There seems to be a discrepancy, Gorath rumbled, his translator struggling to convey the proper menace in his tone. The house suspects irregular betting patterns. Theron maintained his casual posture, though his muscles tensed imperceptibly. Irregular? I'd call it fortunate. Lysira stepped closer to Theron, her shoulder brushing against his bare arm. The contact sent an unexpected surge of warmth through him, and he caught a faint whiff of her exotic perfume, something akin to star blossoms and ionized air. The odds of such a winning streak, Gorath continued, gesturing to a holographic display of Theron's games, are approximately 1 in 7 million. Then I guess it's my lucky cycle, Theron replied, with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. He noticed several security drones positioning themselves around the perimeter of the crowd. Lysira's fingers found his forearm, her touch cool against his skin. They're working with Zorgan, she whispered, her breath tickling his ear. The entire management is in his pocket. Theron nodded slightly, keeping his attention focused on Gorath. I assume you'll want to review the surveillance footage? Already done, Gorath said, his crystalline fingers tapping a complex pattern on his wrist-mounted computer. We've detected anomalies consistent with quantum manipulation devices. The crowd began to murmur, and Theron felt Lysira's grip tighten on his arm. He knew what was coming next. The House declares all bets void, Gorath announced. All winnings are to be returned, and all property restored to their previous owners. Zorgan emerged from behind Gorath, his tendrils writhing with smug satisfaction. Come, Lysira. It's time to go home. Like hell, Theron said, his voice dropping to a dangerous octave. You can't void a bet just because you don't like the outcome. Station law grants the House final authority in gambling disputes, Gorath stated flatly. This is not a negotiation. Lysira stepped forward, her chin raised defiantly. I am not property to be restored. I made my choice. Your choices, Zorgan sneered, were forfeit the moment I purchased your indenture contract. Theron felt his temperature rising, but he maintained a semblance of composure. Show me these anomalies. I want to see the proof. Gorath's crystalline face fractured into what might have been a smile. That information is proprietary. Security, escort Mr. Keel to the detention area for processing. 2 hulking Vorgan guards approached, their cybernetic limbs whirring ominously. The crowd began to disperse, sensing imminent violence. Theron's mind raced through his options. He could probably take the Vorgans in a straight fight. Human strength and reflexes were often underestimated, but that would only escalate the situation, making things far worse. They needed a different tactic. Lysira pressed against his side, her body language casual, but her voice urgent. The maintenance access panel, behind the bar, she whispered. It leads to the station's secondary power grid. Interesting timing for a maintenance lesson, Theron murmured back, noting the security drone's positioning. I used to work here, she replied. Before Zorgan. I know every escape route in this sector. Theron's grin turned genuine. Now that is useful information. Mr. Keel, Gorath said, his patience visibly wearing thin. Come quietly, or... Theron never let him finish. In one fluid motion, he swept Lysira into his arms and vaulted backward over the gaming table. The security drones opened fire with stun blasts, but Theron had already rolled them behind a massive Jthan-S bulk, using the Jthan-S natural electromagnetic field as cover. Sorry about this, he called to the Jthan, who merely rumbled in amusement. They sprinted toward the bar, dodging through the chaos of panicking patrons. Zorgan was screaming orders, his tendrils flailing wildly. The Vorgan guards pursued with mechanical precision, their heavy footsteps shaking the deck plates. Lysira proved surprisingly agile, matching Theron's pace perfectly. They reached the bar just as the security drones acquired a new firing solution. Down! Theron shouted, pulling Lysira close as energy bolts sizzled overhead. The bartender, a multi-limbed octopod, ducked with remarkable speed. Lysira's fingers danced across the access panel. Security lock, almost got it. The panel slid open with a hydraulic hiss, revealing a narrow maintenance shaft. Theron could hear Gorath barking orders, coordinating a surrounding maneuver. "Ladies first," Theron said with a wink. Lysira rolled her eyes, but a smile played on her lips as she slipped into the shaft. Such a gentleman. Theron followed, pulling the panel shut just as the first Vorgan reached the bar. The shaft was tight, lit only by emergency strips that cast everything in a reddish glow. Lysira's skin took on a fascinating burgundy hue in the dim light. "This way," she whispered, leading them deeper into the station's infrastructure. "There's a residential sector 3 levels down. We can lose them in the market concourse." They crawled through the cramped space, their bodies occasionally brushing in ways that sent sparks of electricity through Theron's nervous system. He tried to focus on their escape, but found himself increasingly distracted by Lysira's proximity and the graceful way she moved. "So," he said, keeping his voice low, "you seem to know a lot about this station's layout." "I was a dealer here for 2 cycles," she replied, "until Zorgan decided to add me to his collection." The bitterness in her voice made Theron's jaw clench. How did he manage that? "He caught me counting cards," she admitted. "Offered me a choice, work for him or face station justice. I should have chosen justice." They reached a junction, and Lysira paused to check their bearings. The maintenance shaft branched in 3 directions, each marked with incomprehensible xenoglyphs. "You're good at cards too, then?" Theron asked, trying to lighten the mood. She turned to face him, their faces inches apart in the narrow space. "I'm good at many things," she said, her voice taking on a playful tone that made his pulse quicken. Before he could respond, the sound of mechanical whirring echoed through the shaft. The security drones had accessed the maintenance network. "Time to move," Theron said reluctantly, breaking the moment. The bustling market concourse of the orbital station Etherium Prime was a kaleidoscope of alien cultures, a perfect place to disappear. Theron and Lysira emerged from a maintenance hatch behind a stall selling bioluminescent fungi, their bodies pressed close in the narrow space. "We need to blend in," Lysira whispered, her breath warm against his neck. "And you, my bare-chested friend, are currently anything but inconspicuous." Theron grinned, acutely aware of her proximity. "I don't hear you complaining." She rolled her eyes, but couldn't quite hide her appreciative glance at his muscular frame. "There's a clothing merchant 2 levels up who owes me a favor. We should." A security drone buzzed overhead, its sensors sweeping the crowd. They ducked behind a display of hovering fabrics, the silken material brushing against their skin. Lysira's body pressed against his, and Theron felt his heart rate accelerate for reasons entirely unrelated to their pursuit. "This way," she murmured, leading him through a maze of market stalls. The air was thick with exotic spices and the chatter of 1,000 different languages. Holographic advertisements flickered overhead, casting ever-changing patterns across Lysira's jade skin. They wove through the crowd, adopting the casual pace of browsing shoppers. Theron noticed how naturally they moved together, anticipating each other's steps like dancers in perfect synchronicity. "Tell me something," he said, as they paused to examine a display of crystalline jewelry. "Why did you really decide to stay with me?" Lysira's fingers traced a pattern on his arm, sending shivers down his spine. "Because you saw me as a person, not a possession." "And?" She hesitated, meeting his eyes. "Because I've never met anyone quite like you." The intensity of her gaze made his breath catch. Before he could respond, a commotion erupted behind them. Zorgan's enforcers were pushing through the crowd, their cybernetic scanners sweeping the area. They ducked into a narrow alley between market sections. The space was barely wide enough for 2, forcing them chest to chest. Theron could feel Lysira's heart racing, matching his own rapid pulse. "There's a hostelry nearby," she whispered, her fingers trailing down his chest. "Private. Discreet. The owner specializes in helping people disappear for a while." The suggestion in her voice was unmistakable. Theron cupped her face, his thumb brushing her cheek. Are you sure? Her response was to press closer, her body fitting against his like a missing puzzle piece. The chemistry between them was electric, a force as powerful as any gravitational field. They made their way through back alleys and service corridors, the tension between them building with each step. The hostelry was hidden in plain sight, its entrance disguised as a maintenance store. The owner, a telepathic Mirian, merely nodded at their arrival, sensing their need for privacy. Their room was small but elegant, with a view of the station's artificial sunset painting the market concourse in golden hues. Lysira moved to the window, her silhouette outlined in amber light. I've never felt this way before, she said softly. With Zorgan, with anyone, it was always about ownership, control. But with you. Theron stepped behind her, his hands settling on her waist. She leaned back against him, fitting perfectly in his embrace. With you I feel free, she whispered. Free to want, to choose to. Words became unnecessary as they turned to each other, the last barriers between them dissolving in the sunset's glow. Their connection transcended species and culture, becoming something primal and pure. Later, as they lay tangled in sheets that seemed to shimmer with their own bioluminescence, Lysira traced the contours of Theron's face. I never knew it could be like this, she murmured. So, equal. So right. Theron kissed her palm, still amazed by the softness of her skin. On Earth we have a saying, sometimes, the best things in life are completely accidental. She laughed, the sound like wind chimes. Is that what I am? Your accidental prize? No, he said seriously, pulling her closer. You're the one who chose me. A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the distant sounds of the market and their synchronized breathing. But reality couldn't be held at bay forever. They won't stop looking for us, Lysira said finally. Zorgan doesn't handle loss well. Especially not something he considers his property. Theron's arms tightened around her protectively. Let them come. I'm not letting anyone take you back to that life. She propped herself up on an elbow, her platinum blonde hair falling like a curtain around them. You know, for a human, you're remarkably adaptable to alien relationships. He grinned. Maybe I'm just remarkably adaptable to you. A sudden commotion in the market below drew their attention. Through the window, they could see security drones conducting systematic searches of the area. We should move soon, Theron said, though he made no immediate move to leave their sanctuary. Lysira nodded, but her eyes held a mischievous glint. Soon, she agreed, pulling him back to her. But not quite yet. The Mirian hostelry owner on Etherium Prime appeared at their door just as the dawn's artificial light began filtering through the station's transparent dome. His crystalline form shimmered with urgency. A smuggler's vessel departs in 3 hours, he communicated telepathically. The captain owes me a debt. She'll take you both, no questions asked. Theron felt Lysira stir beside him, her skin glowing with a subtle phosphorescence he hadn't noticed before. Where's the ship headed? He asked. The Outer Rim colonies, the Mirian projected. Beyond Zorgan's influence. Lysira sat up, holding the shimmering sheets close. The Outer Rim. Her voice held a mix of hope and apprehension. That's perfect, actually. My people have settlements there. Theron turned to her, surprised. You've never mentioned your homeworld before. She smiled mysteriously. There's a lot we haven't had time to discuss. Like how your human physiology seems remarkably compatible with mine. The Mirian's crystalline form flickered with what might have been embarrassment. I'll leave you to prepare, he projected, sliding out the door. Once alone, Lysira turned to Theron, her expression serious. There's something you should know. My species, the Viridian, we're known for our adaptive biology. It's why traders like Zorgan value us so highly. Her face darkened at the mention of her former captor. Theron took her hand, marveling at how their fingers intertwined perfectly. Adaptive how? We can bond with compatible species. Not just physically, but biologically. It's rare, but when we find the right match. She placed his hand on her abdomen, and his eyes widened as he felt a subtle warmth pulsing beneath her skin. Are you saying? She nodded, a mixture of joy and uncertainty in her eyes. It seems humans and Viridian are more compatible than anyone could have guessed. I'm carrying your child, Theron. The news hit him like a gravitational wave. In the space of a few days, he'd won a woman in a card game, fallen in love, and now. That's incredible, he breathed, pulling her close. You're not upset? She asked, her voice small. Upset? Lysaira, this is. He laughed, overcome with emotion. This is amazing. Terrifying, yes, but amazing. Their moment was interrupted by the distant sound of security drones. Reality crashed back in. They were still fugitives, and now, with even more at stake. We need to move, Theron said reluctantly, pulling away. But first, tell me everything. About your people. About us. As they dressed and gathered their few belongings, Lysaira explained. The Viridian were a species of natural diplomats. Their biology evolved to bridge gaps between different races. Their ability to form deep biological bonds with compatible species had made them both valued and vulnerable throughout the galaxy. That's why Zorgan kept me, she said bitterly. He thought he could breed a new line of companions for his wealthy clients. But it doesn't work that way. The bond has to be natural. Chosen. Like us, Theron finished, understanding dawning. They slipped out of the hostelry through a service entrance, making their way through the gradually awakening market. Theron had acquired a shirt, but they still drew curious glances. A human and a Viridian together was an unusual sight. The smuggler ship is docked in Bay 17, Lysaira whispered, as they navigated the morning crowd. It's a long-range hauler, disguised as a cargo vessel. Theron noticed her steps were lighter, more graceful than before. You're glowing, he observed. She smiled. It's part of the bonding process. My body is adapting to carry our child. Human DNA is remarkably resilient. They reached a junction where maintenance corridors intersected with public spaces. Security was heavier here, with automated checkpoints scanning all passengers. We'll never make it through the regular channel, Theron muttered. Lysaira squeezed his hand. There's another way. The cargo processing tubes. They're designed for freight, but we're desperate enough to try anything, Theron finished, pulling her into a maintenance alcove as a patrol passed. Their bodies pressed together in the tight space, and Theron felt that now familiar surge of connection between them. Lysaira's skin brightened slightly at his touch, and he could feel the subtle warmth of their growing child. I never thought I'd say this, she whispered, but I'm glad Zorgan lost that card game. Best accident of my life, Theron agreed, kissing her softly. They made their way to the cargo level, dodging patrols and using Lysaira's knowledge of the station's layout. The processing tubes were massive, transparent cylinders designed to move freight between docking bays. The artificial gravity is weaker here, Lysaira explained, as they prepared to enter the tube system. We can use that to our advantage. Theron looked at her with concern. Is it safe for you? Now. She smiled at his protectiveness. Viridian women are quite resilient, especially when carrying a child. Our bodies naturally adapt to protect the developing life. They slipped into the tube system just as another security sweep passed overhead. In the reduced gravity, they could move quickly and quietly through the massive cylinders. The cargo tube system deposited Theron and Lysaira near docking Bay 17, where their supposed salvation awaited. The smuggler vessel, Star Wanderer, looked innocuous enough, a standard long-range hauler with weathered hull plating and legitimate-looking registration markers. Too legitimate, Theron thought, as they crouched behind a stack of cargo containers. His years of gambling had taught him to spot things that seemed too perfect. Something wrong. Lysaira whispered, her hand instinctively moving to her abdomen. Her skin had taken on a subtle, pearl-like sheen, a Viridian trait that Theron now knew indicated heightened awareness. Zorgan? He asked, scanning the seemingly empty docking bay. No, well, yes, but there's something else. She closed her eyes, focusing. The captain, her thoughts aren't right. The ship's captain, a tall Srelian named Mira, emerged from the vessel's airlock. Her scaled skin shifted colors like oil on water, and her movements had the fluid grace typical of her aquatic species. Your ride awaits, Mira called out, her voice carrying an undertone that made Theron's combat instincts flare. They stepped out cautiously. Mira's smile widened, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth. A human and a Viridian. How fascinating. You know what we are. Theron said. It wasn't a question. Oh, I know many things, Mira purred. I know about your unique bond about the child, and I know exactly how much certain parties would pay for such specimens. The trap sprung. Security barriers hummed to life around the docking bay as Zorgan's enforcers emerged from hiding spots. Simultaneously, figures in Research Institute uniforms appeared from the Star Wanderer. A bidding war, Lysira realized, her voice bitter. Zorgan versus the scientists who want to study us. Precisely, Mira gloated. Though I must admit, Zorgan's offer is currently the highest. Theron stepped in front of Lysira protectively, his muscles tensing. We're not for sale. Everything's for sale, Zorgan's voice boomed as the merchant himself appeared. You should know that by now, human. After all, isn't that how you acquired my property in the first place? Lysira's skin flared with anger. I was never your property. The biological compatibility between human and Viridian is unprecedented, one of the scientists interjected, his instruments whirring. The research potential alone. Enough. Theron's voice cut through the chaos. Lysira isn't some experiment, and she definitely isn't property. She's my... He paused, realizing they'd never actually defined their relationship. Wife, Lysira finished firmly, taking his hand. By Viridian law, our biological bond and shared child make us married. The declaration seemed to stun everyone, including Theron, though his heart swelled at her words. Even Zorgan looked momentarily thrown off balance. How romantic, Mira sneered. But it changes nothing. Now, shall we start the bidding? Theron squeezed Lysira's hand, a silent signal. They discussed contingency plans, knowing something might go wrong. What no one knew was that Viridian women weren't just adaptable, they were natural empaths, especially when carrying a child. Lysira closed her eyes, concentrating. The lights in the docking bay flickered as she reached out with her mind, touching the consciousness of every being present. Not to control, Viridian couldn't do that, but to share. Suddenly, everyone in the bay felt what she felt, the joy of true connection with Theron, the terror of being treated as property, the fierce protective instinct for their unborn child, the deep primal love that had grown between them. The emotional assault staggered their captors. Even Zorgan stumbled back, his tendrils writhing in distress. Theron seized the moment. He'd noticed something earlier. The cargo containers they'd hidden behind weren't just cover, they were environmental units. And one was labeled Srelian Atmospheric Medium, pressurized. With a powerful kick, he ruptured the container. Pressurized water exploded outward, catching Mira and several others off guard. In the confusion, Theron and Lysira bolted for the Star Wanderer's airlock. The ship's controls are locked. Lysira called out as they reached the bridge. Not for long, Theron grinned, pulling out a data chip. Remember that favor the hostelry owner owed us? Turns out, he's quite the slicer. The ship's systems came alive under his touch, overriding Mira's lockouts. Outside, chaos reigned as security forces clashed with Zorgan's men, while the scientists scrambled to protect their equipment from the spreading flood. Hold on. Theron warned as he engaged the engines. The Star Wanderer shuddered, breaking free from its moorings. Lysira slipped into the co-pilot seat, her hands dancing over the controls with natural grace. The station's defense grid is activating. Let them try to stop us, Theron said, pushing the engines to full power. The ship shot forward, threading through the closing bay doors with inches to spare. As they accelerated away from the station, Lysira turned to Theron, her skin glowing with a mixture of excitement and something deeper. Did you mean it? About accepting me as your wife? He pulled her close, their foreheads touching. I meant it the moment I told you you were free to choose. I just didn't know it then. The Star Wanderer's sensors blared a warning as 3 sleek pursuit vessels emerged from hyperspace behind them, Zorgan's personal fleet, heavily armed and modified for speed. They're faster than us, Lysira observed, her hands flying over the navigation console. Her skin pulsed with a soft bioluminescence that Theron had learned indicated stress. But not smarter, Theron replied, executing a series of evasive maneuvers. Contact the Terran Defense Fleet. Authorization code, Drake 7 Alpha. Lysira shot him a surprised look. You're military? Former Special Operations, he admitted, banking the ship hard to avoid a warning shot. Technically, on extended leave. The gambling thing was a cover. Any other secrets I should know about, husband? Her tone was playful despite their situation, and the word husband sent a pleasant shiver down his spine. Well, a direct hit rocked the ship, cutting him off. Tell you what, I'll explain everything over dinner, once we're safe. The comm system crackled to life as Zorgan's voice filled the bridge. Return my property, human, and I might let you live. Theron felt Lysira's anger flare through their bond. She grabbed the comm. I am not your property, Zorgan. I never was. I'm a free woman, married under Viridian law, and carrying my husband's child. A child. Zorgan's voice turned calculating. A human Viridian hybrid, even more valuable than I thought. Terran Defense Fleet responding, a new voice cut in. This is Captain Elara Vance of the TDF Valkyrie. Identify yourselves. Theron grinned. Captain Vance, remember that favor you owe me from the Kepler 186F incident? A chuckle came over the comm. Theron Keel, you magnificent bastard. What trouble have you gotten into now? As Theron explained their situation, Lysira monitored the pursuing ships. They're charging weapons. Zorgan, Vance's voice turned steel-hard. Your vessels have entered Terran-protected space. Stand down immediately. This is a private matter, Zorgan snarled. The female is my legal property. The female, Vance replied, is married to a Terran citizen under recognized alien law, making her entitled to Terran protection. Additionally, trafficking in sentient beings is a Class 1 violation of Terran space law. 3 massive Terran warships dropped out of hyperspace, their imposing forms dwarfing Zorgan's pursuit vessels. The Valkyrie's weapon systems powered up with a visible surge of energy. Your choice, merchant, Vance said coldly. Retreat, or face the consequences. For a tense moment, Zorgan's ships held position. Then, with obvious reluctance, they turned away. This isn't over, Zorgan threatened before his ships jumped to hyperspace. The Valkyrie will escort you to Terran space, Vance informed them. Welcome to the family, Mrs. Keel. In the relative safety of their escort, Theron engaged the autopilot and turned to Lysira. She was practically glowing, her skin emanating waves of relief, and something else. So, she said, moving closer. Special operations. He pulled her onto his lap, savoring the way she fit against him. Earth's been preparing for greater galactic involvement. We needed people who could blend in. Is that why you were so good at cards? She asked, tracing patterns on his chest. Actually, that part was natural talent, he grinned. The mission was just to observe. Then I saw you and, well, plans changed. She kissed him deeply, their bond humming with shared emotion. I'm glad they did. Later, in their quarters, as they celebrated their escape in a more intimate fashion, Lysira's empathic abilities heightened their connection to new levels. Their bond grew stronger with each passing moment, their shared pleasure amplified by their deep emotional connection. I can feel our child, Lysira whispered afterward, guiding Theron's hand to her abdomen. The human DNA, it's making the bond even stronger than usual for my species. Is that good? He asked, concerned. She smiled radiantly. It's perfect. Now our child will be unique, the first of a new kind of being, a bridge between our peoples. The ship's comm system chimed softly. Approaching Terran space, Captain Vance announced. You two might want to make yourselves presentable. There's quite a welcome committee forming. Welcome committee? Theron asked. Vance laughed. Earth's been hoping to establish diplomatic relations with the Viridian for years. A human Viridian marriage and child? We're about to become very popular. As long as we're together, Lysira said, her skin glowing with happiness. I don't care who wants to study us or talk to us. We're free, we're safe, and we're family. Speaking of family, Theron said, suddenly remembering something. Wait until you meet my mother. She's been pestering me about grandchildren for years. Lysira's laughter filled their quarters as the Star Wanderer approached Earth, their new home, and the beginning of their next adventure. The Terran Diplomatic Center in Neo Geneva sparkled under the morning sun, its crystalline architecture designed to accommodate various alien species. Theron adjusted his formal military uniform, while Lysira, radiant in a flowing emerald gown that complemented her skin tone, stood beside him. "Ready for this?" he asked, noting how her platinum blonde hair seemed to shimmer with anticipation. "As ready as I'll ever be," she replied, her hand resting protectively over her slightly swollen abdomen. Their child's presence had strengthened their bond even further, allowing them to sense each other's emotions with increasing clarity. Ambassador Richard Vance, Captain Alara Vance's father, greeted them at the entrance. "The Viridian High Council has agreed to send representatives," he announced. "Your marriage could be the key to establishing formal diplomatic relations." "And Zorgan?" Theron asked, his protective instincts flaring. "Still lurking in neutral space," Vance replied grimly. "Our intelligence suggests he's gathering allies among other merchant houses who deal in similar trades." Lysira's skin darkened slightly, a sign of anger Theron had come to recognize. "They're afraid we'll disrupt their business model. A successful human-Viridian union threatens everything they've built." The diplomatic chamber was filled with representatives from various species. Theron recognized several high-ranking Terran military officials, including his former commanding officer, General Petrov. The Viridian delegation arrived in a shimmer of teleportation energy, tall, elegant beings with varying shades of green skin. Their leader, High Counselor Lyra, approached Lysira with obvious interest. "So," she said in perfectly accented English, "you're the one who has changed everything." Lysira stood proudly beside Theron. "We both have." A commotion at the chamber's entrance drew their attention. A group of merchant representatives demanded entry, led by a familiar violet-skinned figure, Zorgan. Theron growled, stepping forward, but Lysira caught his arm. "Wait," she whispered. "Something's different." Zorgan had officially requested diplomatic recognition, using ancient trade laws to force his way into the negotiations. But as he approached, Theron noticed the merchant's usual confidence seemed forced. "The merchant consortium demands this union be annulled," Zorgan announced. "It violates multiple trade agreements and threatens established business practices." "You mean it threatens your ability to treat sentient beings as property?" High Counselor Lyra countered, her eyes narrowed. "The Viridian have long opposed such practices, but lacked the strength to stop them. Now with Terran support." "Is that a threat?" Zorgan's tendrils writhed. "It's a promise," Ambassador Vance interjected. "Earth recognizes the Keel-Viridian marriage as legal and binding. Any attempt to interfere will be considered an act of aggression." The diplomatic chamber erupted in debate. Theron and Lysira found themselves at the center of a galactic political storm, their personal love story becoming a catalyst for change. During a brief recess, they escaped to a private garden terrace. Lysira's skin glowed in the Earth sunset, her beauty still taking Theron's breath away. "I never thought winning a card game would lead to this," he mused, pulling her close. She laughed, the sound like music. "Technically, you won me in the game, but I won you in every way that matters." Their moment of peace was shattered by alarms. Security screens activated around the diplomatic center as multiple unauthorized ships entered Earth's atmosphere. Zorgan. Theron realized. This was his plan all along, use the diplomatic meeting as cover for an attack. Lysira's empathic abilities surged, her pregnancy-enhanced strength reaching out. "He's not alone. Other merchant houses, they're desperate. Our union represents everything they fear." General Petrov's voice crackled over the comm. "Drake, get your wife to the secure bunker. The Terran defense fleet is engaging, but some ships might break through." Instead of fear, Theron felt Lysira's determination through their bond. "No more running," she said firmly. "This ends today." They made their way to the command center, where Earth's military leadership coordinated the defense. Through the view screens, they watched Zorgan's coalition engage the Terran fleet. "They're targeting the diplomatic center," Captain Vance reported from the Valkyrie, "trying to prevent the alliance from being formalized." Lysira stepped forward, her pregnancy-enhanced empathic abilities reaching out. "I can feel their minds, their fear, their desperation." "Can you stop them?" Theron asked, supporting her as she channeled her power. "Not alone," she smiled, taking his hand. "But together." Their bond flared to life, human strength and Viridian empathy combining in ways never before seen. Through Lysira, Theron could feel the minds of their attackers, Through him, she gained the focus to project their shared emotions, not just their love, but the fundamental rightness of their union. The effect rippled through the attacking fleet. Some ships immediately withdrew, others hesitated, their crews affected by the unprecedented psychic display. Now, General Petrov ordered. The Terran fleet moved in, disabling the remaining hostile vessels with surgical precision. Zorgan's ship, caught in the defensive net, was the last to surrender. When security forces brought him to the diplomatic chamber, he seemed smaller somehow, his arrogance replaced by bewilderment. How, he demanded, staring at Theron and Lysira. How can a mere human and a Viridian? Lysira answered simply, her skin glowing with triumph, real love doesn't treat people as property. It sets them free. 1 Earth year after the diplomatic showdown, Theron paced nervously in the medical wing of the Joint Human-Viridian Research Center. The facility, specially designed to accommodate both species, hummed with anticipation as Lysira went into labor. Your wife's biology is responding perfectly to the pregnancy, Dr. Jenna Ramirez assured him. The human-Viridian genetic combination has proven remarkably stable. Through their bond, Theron could feel Lysira's determination and strength. Her skin pulsed with a brilliant glow that filled the entire room, a natural response of Viridian mothers during childbirth. He hadn't left her side for a moment, their shared intimacy growing stronger with each passing hour. High Counselor Lyra waited outside with Ambassador Vance, both representing their respective species' interest in this historic birth. But for Theron and Lysira, politics were the furthest thing from their minds. I can feel him, Lysira whispered between contractions, her hand squeezing Theron's. He's strong, like his father. Theron kissed her forehead, marveling at how their love had created something so extraordinary. And beautiful, like his mother, I bet. Hours later, their son entered the world with a healthy cry. His skin was a lighter shade of green than Lysira's, with subtle variations that seemed to shift in the light. His eyes were human-shaped but held a distinctive golden fleck of the Viridian. A dusting of platinum blonde hair crowned his head. He's perfect, Lysira breathed, cradling their newborn. Through their bond, Theron felt her joy mixing with his own, creating a symphony of emotions that brought tears to his eyes. What shall we name him? Theron asked gently, touching his son's tiny hand. Lysira smiled. In Viridian tradition, children of great destiny receive names from ancient stories. I would like to call him Kalen, after the legendary peacemaker who united the first Viridian colonies. Kalen Keel, Theron tested the name. Ilaikite. The baby opened his eyes, seeming to respond to the sound. The baby opened his eyes, seeming to respond to his name. He showed no signs of supernatural abilities or impossible powers, just the natural strength of human genetics combined with Viridian adaptability. Later that evening, as Lysira rested, Theron stood by the window of their private suite, holding his son. The Earth's moon hung low in the sky, its light mixing with the bioluminescent gardens that had been planted to make Viridian visitors feel at home. You know, he said softly to Kalen, I met your mother because of a lucky hand at cards. Some might call it chance, but I call it destiny. Stillse romantic Gambler. Lysira's voice came from the bed, full of affection. Theron brought their son back to her, settling beside them on the bed. Best bet I ever made. Even with all the chaos that followed, she teased, her skin glowing with contentment as she nursed their child. Especially because of that, he replied, kissing her softly. Every challenge just proved how right we are together. A gentle chime announced visitors. Ambassador Vance entered with High Counselor Lyra, both bearing traditional gifts from their respective cultures. The first human Viridian child, Lyra said warmly. He represents everything we hoped for when our peoples first met. And more importantly, Vance added, he represents love that transcends all boundaries. News of Kalen's birth spread quickly through both human and Viridian space. Even in the shadowy corners of the galaxy where beings were still traded as property, the story of how a chance card game led to revolutionary change became legend. Zorgan, serving his sentence in a Terran rehabilitation facility, requested permission to send a gift, a traditional Viridian blessing crystal. Lysira, showing the grace that characterized her people, accepted it as a sign of his reformation. That night, after their visitors had left and Kalen slept peacefully in his bassinet, Theron and Lysira stood on their private balcony.
The gardens below pulsed with bioluminescent life, Mädchen se erhalbsilontalm auf lysiras angentle glo.
Did you ever imagine, she asked, leaning back against his chest, that winning a card game would lead to all this? Theron wrapped his arms around her, marveling at how perfectly they still fit together. I thought I was just getting lucky at cards. Instead, I got lucky in every way that matters. Their bond hummed with shared emotion as they gazed at their sleeping son. In him, they saw not just their love made manifest, but the promise of a future where barriers between species meant nothing compared to the power of the heart. You know, Lysira said playfully, turning in his arms, Viridian tradition says we should try for a sibling soon, to maintain the harmony of the family unit. Theron grinned, pulling her closer. Well, who am I to argue with tradition? As they came together in a passionate embrace, their bond singing with joy and desire, both knew that their greatest adventure, building a family, and a future together, was just beginning.